He leapt onto the coffin, teeth bared, claws dragging across polished oak as the entire funeral erupted in screams. But he didn't bark for grief. He barked because the body inside wasn't his partner's. This wasn't mourning. This was a warning. Before anyone could react, the German shepherd had already clawed at the seal, his howler slicing through the prayers, demanding the truth no one dared confront. Who was this dog, and what did he know that no human could see? That's where everything changed. Not just a funeral turned upside down, but a nationwide manhunt ignited by a dog's instincts. You think this is just a story about loyalty? It's not. It's about betrayal buried in uniform, a dead man who wasn't dead, and a system built to silence the only witness they never thought would. His name is Rex, and this entire series begins with him. What do you think was really inside that casket? Comment your theory, like if Rex already earned your respect, and hit subscribe if you believe no truth stays buried forever. This story doesn't start at the beginning. It starts at the breaking point. Stay to the end, and trust the dog. The chapel was cloaked in a silence that felt less like peace and more like a warning. The kind of silence that hummed low in the bones, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Morning light poured through stained glass windows, bathing the dark oak casket in fractured colors. Rows of uniformed officers stood in stoic formation, faces carved from stone, chins clenched, metals glinting softly like silent testimonies. In the first pew sat the widow Evelyn, pale as ash, her black veil trembling each time she exhaled. Her hands clutched a folded letter that never made it to the mailbox. But even amidst the sorrow, eyes flicked. The German shepherd, Paul's canine partner for nearly 8 years, had always been known for his composure, his training, his discipline. But today, something was off. When the pallbearers carried the coffin into the aisle, Rex's posture shifted. Subtle at first, a slight stiffening of the spine, a twitch of the ear. But then came the growl, low, deep, resonant. It vibrated through the polished floors and up the wooden pews like a tremor before the quake. Several heads turned. Few guests flinched. The handler holding Rex's leash tightened his grip, whispering, "Easy, boy." But the dog's eyes never left the casket. The growl didn't stop. It grew louder, more urgent. A primal sound, not of grief but of warning. As if Rex were guarding, not mourning. As if he knew something that no one else did. The priest paused mid-prayer, casting a quick glance at the commotion. Evelyn looked back, her veil lifting with the motion. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. Instead, her eyes followed Rex's stare. Her pulse quickened. She had seen this look before, back when Paul and Rex had returned from raids in foreign lands. It was the stare Rex gave when something wasn't just wrong, it was dangerous. The handler tugged gently, trying to pull the dog back, but Rex held his ground, paws firm, body rigid, eyes locked forward. And then, there was the man in black. He was standing near the rear wall, tucked between a pair of wooden columns, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, his face obscured beneath a wide-brimmed black hat. No one seemed to know him, yet no one dared to question his presence. He hadn't moved once since the service began, hadn't bowed his head, hadn't blinked. His eyes, sharp and cold, tracked Rex's every motion with unsettling interest. Something about his stillness felt wrong. Not respectful, calculated, like a predator waiting. Detective Clara James, seated near the center, turned subtly in her seat, her instincts tingling. She followed Rex's line of sight, then flicked her gaze toward the man in black, her brow furrowed. She didn't recognize him, not from the force, not from the family circle. She leaned over to Officer Darnell beside her and whispered, "You see that guy back there?" Darnell nodded once, tight-lipped, blocked him the minute he walked in. Didn't sign the book either. Meanwhile, the priest, now visibly uneasy, attempted to continue the eulogy. But Rex didn't stop. His growl became a bark, a sharp, echoing bark that pierced the solemn air like a blade. The sound cracked through the chapel. People gasped. One woman even dropped her purse. The handler yanked the leash again, this time more forcefully. "Rex, down," he barked. But Rex didn't obey. Instead, he planted his feet and barked again, this time directly at the casket. Evelyn stood, her legs trembling. "Why is he barking like that?" she whispered. No one answered. The priest exchanged worried glances with the funeral director, and still, the man in black stood motionless. Clara rose from her seat. Slowly, quietly, she stepped into the aisle, moving sideways toward the back, her eyes never leaving the figure in black. From the shoes she issue, not the polished dress kind, but field boots scuffed at the toe. No one wore those to a funeral unless they were hiding something or blending in too well. She narrowed her gaze. The man finally noticed her watching. He tilted his head slightly, just enough to show the glint of something beneath his collar, what looked like a burn scar curling up the side of his neck. Then, in a sudden movement, he slipped through a side exit and vanished. Back near the front, Rex had now dropped into a crouch, ears pinned, eyes sharp as razors. The handler struggled to restrain him. "He's never done this," he muttered. "Not even at Paul's last mission debrief, not at the hospital, not when we—" His voice cracked. Clara reached the door just in time to see the black coat disappear behind a tall row of hedges lining the chapel's rear lot. She turned to Officer Darnell. "Lock the gates, nobody leaves until I talk to Evelyn. And get me security footage from the front entrance. That guy didn't come here to grieve." Evelyn, still standing, clutched the letter tighter. Something in her gut twisted. Rex had always been her husband's second soul. If he was reacting this way, then something was deeply, horribly wrong. Her eyes returned to the casket. She whispered softly, barely audible, "That's not him, is it, boy?" Rex's growl deepened. The air was thick with tension, every breath inside the chapel drawn with caution. Every eye now locked on the growling German shepherd. The handler, a seasoned officer named Barrett, still gripping the leash with both hands, braced himself as Rex's snarls grew more erratic. Clara hadn't yet returned from the side exit, and Evelyn's knuckles had turned white from clutching that letter. Paul's. Then, in one sudden, startling moment, it happened. With a guttural snarl and an explosive twist of muscle, Rex jerked backward, then launched forward with force. The leash snapped, the collar buckled. Barrett stumbled, thrown off balance as Rex bolted past the rows of mourners. His nails clicked violently across the hardwood floor like gunfire echoing in a canyon. Gasps burst from the crowd. Someone screamed, chairs scraped backward in panic, and Rex's eyes wild, fixated. Rex hurled his body onto the dark oak coffin, with a sound that was both solid and strange wood colliding with urgency. The American flag folded atop shifted from the movement, hanging precariously off one corner. The priest dropped his book. Evelyn let out a sharp cry, halfway between terror and realization. "No," she gasped, stepping forward before being restrained by two officers. Rex's paws slammed against the coffin lid. He barked again, frantic, focused, primal. Not the bark of a dog mourning his master. This was the sound of detection, of exposure, and in that thunderous chaos, people rose to their feet, unsure whether to intervene or simply flee. Barrett, pale and breathless, scrambled after him, but didn't dare grab Rex by force. "Something's wrong," he muttered aloud, scanning the area, unsure of what to do next. Then his eyes caught something else. Movement. Just beyond the back pews, that man, the one Clara had clocked earlier, dressed in all black, wide-brimmed hat now lowered, collar pulled high. As people focused on Rex, the man moved with quiet precision, slipping past the side aisle toward the chapel's arched exit. But Barrett's eyes narrowed as he noticed a glint of something dark against the man's right hand. Not a weapon, blood. A smear of it, just beneath the cuff of the tailored suit. Dried and cracked. The kind of blood that had sat for hours, maybe days. Clara hadn't returned yet. Darnell was focused on calming the front row, so Barrett made a decision. He stepped sideways, weaving through mourners, keeping the man in black within his line of sight. The figure was methodical, unhurried. Not running, not hiding, just. A nearby officer tried to pull him off, but yelped as Rex snapped. Not to harm, but to warn. Stay away. The chapel was no longer a place of mourning. It had become a crime scene. Evelyn cried out again, louder this time, the sound ragged and raw. "Someone stop him! What's in that coffin?" Her voice cracked on the last word, her body trembling, soul unraveling. The priest, White Ace, stepped back toward the pulpit, muttering Hail Marys under his breath. A child began to sob in the third row. Phones were pulled out, some to Clara re-enter the chapel from the side door. gun drawn but low, eyes scanning. She moved fast, cutting through the crowd, heading straight for Evelyn. "Where's the man in black?" she barked. Barrett pointed wordlessly toward the grand wooden exit. Clara turned on her heel and sprinted, calling into her radio. "Subject moving westbound through Chapel Exit. Possible blood evidence on hand. Need outside units now." Outside, the sun had risen higher, spilling harsh white light across the cemetery lawn. The man in black had already cleared the iron gates and disappeared behind a line of funeral cars parked in a tight column. Clara rushed through the doors just as they slammed behind him. Her pulse raced, her breath was shallow. Every second felt like a countdown. And inside the chapel, Rex gave a final warning growl, then planted both paws against the lid. There was a loud crack, the sound of old hinges resisting the inevitable. The casket trembled. Officers hesitated. No one wanted to open it. Not yet, not like this. But everyone felt that something inside was wrong. Something was waiting. And back in the parking lot, the man in black reached into his coat. Not for a weapon, not for a phone, but for something small, folded, bloodstained. He examined it in the palm of his hand, his thumb tracing over the name on the envelope, a name scribbled in Paul's handwriting. Then, with methodical grace, he tucked it into the inner pocket of his coat, adjusted his collar, and turned the corner. The moment the last echoes of Rex's growl faded into the strained silence, all that remained in the chapel was the sound of shallow breathing, shuffled feet, and the faint creak of wood straining under the weight of truth. Clara stood just inside the threshold, her hands still hovering near her holster, eyes darting from the retreating silhouette outside to the chaos in. Evelyn was now at the base of the casket, hands trembling as she reached toward Rex, who had quieted but remained planted like a statue atop the coffin, eyes locked downward as though he could see through the wood. "Get him off," someone muttered, but Barrett shook his head. "No, not yet." Clara pushed forward through the crowd that had parted like a wound torn open, her voice firm. "We need to open it." The funeral director, a man named Charles Bentham, who had handled dozens of military funerals, paled. "That's highly irregular, detective. We'd need—" Clara cut him off, voice low but urgent. "This isn't a funeral anymore. It's a crime scene." She turned to two uniformed officers. "Help me lift the lid." Carefully, two sets of gloved hands gripped the edges of the coffin, the metal hinges groaning under protest. As the lid was lifted, a collective breath was held in the room. Dozens of people suspended in a moment that would divide their memories forever into before and after. Light poured in, illuminating a body laid in full-dress blues. But almost instantly, Clara's gut twisted. Something was wrong. The hair was too dark, the jawline too narrow, the chest too flat. She leaned in, studying the face. The exposed neckline, a faint surgical scar still red and angry, traced beneath the collarbone and disappeared beneath the uniform. She pulled back the fabric carefully. The stitching was fresh, too fresh, medical grade. A post-mortem Y excision from a recent autopsy, not after the department ruled his death an accident. Her eyes snapped to the funeral director. "Who prepared this body?" Bentham stammered. I don't know. It came from state medical, just like always. I assumed—" Clara stepped back, trying to process, but Evelyn's voice sliced through the fog. "That's not my husband," she whispered, staring at the face she didn't recognize. "That's not Paul." Barrett was frozen, mouth half open, until Rex suddenly let out a soft whine, then stepped back from the casket. He sniffed at something near the base of the interior, where velvet lining had begun to pull away from the wood. Clara noticed the motion, leaned in, and reached carefully beneath the lining. Her fingers brushed against something small, cold, and metallic. She gripped it, pulled it free, and held it up to the light. The chapel gasped again. In her hand rested a weathered wristwatch, brass-framed, cracked glass, and a leather band worn smooth from years of use. Evelyn staggered back a step, her eyes filling with tears. "That's Paul's watch. I gave it to him on our 10th anniversary. He never took it off, not once." Clara turned it over. On the back, etched in delicate cursive, read the inscription. There was no mistaking it. This was Paul's. But the body wearing his uniform wasn't him. How did his watch end up beneath a stranger's corpse? She asked aloud, though the answer didn't matter yet. The question itself was a scream in disguise. Something about this whole operation had been staged, meticulously, intentionally. As murmurs spread through the room, Clara's mind raced. The body had been switched, that much was clear. But who was the man in the casket? Who had enough access, enough control to orchestrate a military funeral with the wrong corpse inside and no one questioning it? She turned to the officers. "We need the body identified now. Get a forensics team here ASAP. Thora, I knew." A few guests tried to protest, but the weight of Clara's voice, combined with the chilling image of the wrong man lying in the coffin, was enough to silence them. Outside, sirens began to howl in the distance. The call for backup had gone through. Evelyn was now seated on the front pew, clutching the watch to her chest like a lifeline. Rex sat beside her, quiet, alert, ears flicking at every sound. Clara knelt down, a level with her. Did Paul ever mention anyone who might want to see him disappear? Evelyn shook her head, but hesitated. He had been restless lately, said he was looking into something, a cold case he couldn't let go, but he didn't tell me details, just that it was deeper than anyone realized. Clara's jaw clenched. She'd worked beside Paul for years. If he was onto something dangerous, he wouldn't have shared it with many, maybe no one, maybe only Rex. Clara turned back toward the casket, staring at the unfamiliar face now exposed to the flickering light of truth. This man wasn't Paul, but someone had dressed him in Paul's uniform, buried Paul's memories with him, and tried to close the lid on the truth. Only Rex had refused to let that lid stay shut. And somewhere out there, Paul might still be. Clara stood beside the casket, her fingers tracing the edge of the wood like a surgeon feeling for a pulse that wasn't there. Around her, silence had hardened into something heavier than grief, something tighter than confusion. The wrong body, the right watch. Rex, now seated beside Evelyn, remained still but eerily aware, his eyes following every movement Clara made. There was something in the way he watched. Responsive. Barrett approached quietly, holding his phone. "I called Dr. Langford," he said. "She worked with Rex and Paul in the canine division. She's on her way." Clara nodded. "Good. I need to know what else this dog can do." Barrett frowned. "What do you mean?" Clara didn't look at him when she answered. "I think Rex knew that wasn't Paul before the casket ever opened." Barrett blinked. "That's a stretch," she interrupted, eyes narrowing. "He barked, growled, clawed the damned thing open. Not for Paul, for the lie." Barrett opened his mouth but didn't respond. And then, as if summoned by the weight of the moment, the door creaked open and Dr. Naomi Langford entered the chapel, still in her lab coat, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. She moved directly toward Rex, knelt beside him, and without a word, placed her palm near his snout. "Tell me," Clara said, "was Rex trained for corpse detection?" Langford nodded slowly. "More than that. He was part of a classified trial, Project Deep, latent, designed to detect biochemical inconsistencies in cadavers, formalin irregularities, tampered decomposition, organ extraction, surgical residue. Stuff not visible to the naked eye." Clara's breath hitched. "You're telling me he can detect if a body's been faked? Faked, swapped, surgically altered?" "Yes, and if he barked like that, then I guarantee you he was trying to say, 'This isn't who you think it is.'" Clara turned away, brain spinning. Everything began to shift into sharper focus. The pieces didn't just fall. "Something Paul told me the night before he disappeared." Clara turned to her. "What was it?" Evelyn hesitated, eyes glazed, and then she whispered, "He said if anything ever happened to him, anything suspicious, I should look inside Rex's collar." Clara's eyes widened. "You're only telling me this now? I thought it was paranoia. I thought it was just Paul being careful. Now I'm not sure." Clara dropped to her knees and gently unclipped the small metal buckle beneath Rex's leather collar. Inside the lining, tucked between layers of reinforced Kevlar, was a micro-recorder no bigger than a coin battery. "Jesus," Barrett muttered. Clara stood slowly, already pulling out her phone. "I need a secure player now." Moments later, they stood around the pew bench, the recorder linked to Clara's device. Static filled the chapel. Then Paul's voice crackled through, tired but deliberate. "You're hearing this, I'm probably either missing or presumed dead. I don't know who I can trust anymore. This goes deeper than anyone expected. The trafficking case from East Ridge. It's not just about drugs or stolen IDs. There's something else. They're moving bodies, tampering with evidence, creating alternate identities using corpses. I don't know how high it goes, but I'm starting to think even the department isn't clean. I've got a list, I've got names, but I can't prove anything yet. If they find out what I know, they'll come for me, and if they do, they'll make it look like an accident. Don't trust the reports. Don't trust the uniform, and if they give you a body, 813. And one more thing. There was a pause, a breath, maybe even a tremble. Then Paul's voice lowered to a near whisper. If I'm gone, don't let them bury the wrong man. The recording ended. Everyone in the room was still, as though even the walls were afraid to breathe. Clara stared at the recorder like it might come back to life. He knew, she said softly. He knew exactly what they were going to do. Barrett stepped forward, ledger in the vault. That's restricted access. Only brass can get in without a log. Clara looked at him, and for a moment something hardened behind her eyes. Then it's time someone broke the rules. Outside, the sirens had stopped. The crowd had thinned, but in the growing silence, a storm was building. Clara pocketed the recorder, nodded to Langford, and turned to Barrett. Secure this place. No one touches that casket until forensics arrives. I need to get to the precinct now. Barrett nodded. Rex barked once, not loud. Evelyn rose beside him, hand brushing his head. He never left Paul's side. He won't leave yours now. Clara gave a tight smile, then turned to the exit. But as she pushed open the chapel door, a sliver of shadow moved just beyond the tree line, watching, listening. By the time Clara arrived back at the chapel later that afternoon, the forensic team was already at work. The casket had been relocated to a temporary quarantine tent erected behind the main structure, its polished surface now stripped of flowers and solemnity. What lay inside had become evident. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes told the truth before her voice did. It's not Paul, she said flatly. Clara's breath caught in her chest. You're sure? Langford nodded, handing her the sealed envelope containing the initial results. DNA pulled from tooth pulp and hair follicles. No match to Paul Henning. 0% related. This is someone else entirely. Clara exhaled through gritted teeth, scanning the report quickly even though she knew the conclusion before reading it. Do we know who it is? Langford shook her head. Not yet. No dental records match. But he's had at least 2 surgeries in the past year. 1 lung removed, a spinal rod, possibly a convict, maybe someone from off-grid medical programs. We'll run him through CODIS and Interpol, but it'll take time. Clara folded the envelope and tucked it under her arm. That's time we don't have. Barrett approached, rubbing the back of his neck. The mayor's office is asking questions. Parker's on the line, wants a full report by 6. Clara scoffed. Parker can wait. This isn't just a case anymore. This is a breach. Someone manufactured a body, planted it in Paul's coffin, gave it military honors, and expected no one to question it. She paused, glancing sideways. If Rex hadn't reacted, we'd be having drinks and telling war stories right now over the wrong grave. Langford nodded toward the tent. He's done this before, hasn't he? Barked like that? Clara replied, never. Not once. And now I think maybe he's not finished. Almost as if on cue, Rex, standing nearby, lifted his head sharply. His ears twitched, but alert, Clara narrowed her eyes. Rex, the dog turned, took 3 slow steps toward the tree line that bordered the rear of the cemetery. Then he stopped, looked back over his shoulder, and barked once. The sun hung low, casting elongated shadows across the grass as the wind whispered through branches above them. Claire's boots crunched softly on gravel and fallen leaves. The farther they followed, the quieter the world became. The murmur of the forensic tent faded, replaced by the soft panting of Rex and the occasional flutter of birds disturbed by their approach. Then they saw it. Hidden between 2 overgrown hedgerows at the edge of the service road was a battered gray box truck. Rust flaked along the edges. One of the rear wheels sagged from a flat. The windows were too dark, and the driver's door hung slightly ajar. Rex halted 10 feet away, tail stiff, body taut like a bow drawn and ready. Clara raised a hand to stop Barrett. Don't go any closer. She reached for her sidearm, voice dropping to a whisper. Call it in, quietly. Tell them we've got a possible dump site. Barrett nodded. already backing away to radio. Kara edged forward. Gun drawn, heart thudding hard enough to hear it in her ears. She circled to the passenger side where rust had chewed deep into the lower frame. Then she saw the stain, dark, sticky, barely visible unless the light hit it just right. Dried blood, smeared along the edge of the cargo door. She glanced at Rex, who remained still but locked in. Slowly she reached for the latch, her hand steady despite the dread curdling in her gut. The door creaked open on reluctant hinges. The smell hit first sweat, metal, and something chemical. Inside, under a tarp, were several stacked bins labeled medical waste do not open. But Clara knew better. She peeled one back just enough to see what was inside. Gauze, needles, suggested gloves. Beneath that, vials of clear fluid with no marking. Beneath that, a stained white coat, shredded at the collar. She stepped back, pulled her phone from her belt, and snapped photos while Barrett returned with 2 backup officers and a forensic photographer. "What is this?" he asked, peering over her shoulder. "A mobile operating room?" "More like a disposal site," she muttered. "Or staging ground. Somebody used this truck to prep that body. Or others." Her eyes flicked toward the horizon. "This is bigger than a funeral trick. We've got organ harvesters, surgical tools, chemicals, and someone playing God with corpses." Rex let out a sharp bark again, this time moving toward the cab of the truck. Clara followed, climbed into the passenger side, and opened the glove compartment. Inside, folded neatly, was a manila envelope. On it was a sticker with a handwritten label. Session March 12th, Paul H. Clara's blood ran cold. She opened it. Inside were photos, high-resolution shots of medical records, scans, handwritten notes. At the bottom, a small audio cassette. Another recording. She looked back out the door at Barrett, her voice low. "He was here." Clara flipped through the contents of the envelope with a surgeon's precision. Each sheet a fragment of a story she wasn't yet ready to accept. Medical diagrams, patient logs without names, vials of fluid coded in alphanumerics she didn't recognize, and now a cassette relic of an era when secrets were too dangerous to digitize. She slipped it into an evidence bag, then turned to the glove compartment again. Something crinkled under her touch. She reached behind the envelope, fingers brushing against dry, brittle paper folded multiple times. As she carefully pulled it out, a thin, stained map unfurled in her hands. Red ink traced a single jagged path between a point marked Black Ridge was a defunct industrial site north of the city, a place long shuttered after toxic soil lawsuits and structural failures. "Barrett," she called, holding up the map. "Get me everything on Black Ridge: land deeds, blueprints, satellite feeds. If Paul marked this, it's not just a location, it's an appointment." Barrett took the map and immediately began snapping photos with his phone, forwarding them to dispatch. Clara stepped out of the cab, the air now tinged with the metallic scent of unraveling secrets. She looked toward Rex, who sat quietly near the rear of the truck, his posture stiff, as if he too understood the urgency buried in the ink and blood. "We've got 6 hours until 11 p.m., Clara said, glancing at her watch. If Paul was supposed to meet someone there, it might have been his last move before they silenced him. Barrett paused. Or it's where he still is. Clara's jaw tightened. Either way, we're going. Back at headquarters, Clara entered the evidence vault under the radar, using the access code Paul had recorded, Orion 813. The vault opened with a reluctant sigh, metal groaning against inertia. Inside drawer 17B was an unmarked ledger, leather-bound, brittle with age but dense with handwritten notes. Clara flipped through it, quickly realizing this wasn't Paul's handwriting. It belonged to someone else. Older, angular strokes, methodical. The entries chronicled transactions, aliases, movements of bodies and identities. And then a name she hadn't expected. Nash Carter, intercept confirmed. Clara's blood ran cold. Nash Carter had been Paul's closest friend during their academy years. They had entered undercover service together, disappeared into the system together. And then Nash had supposedly died 5 years ago during an extraction mission gone wrong in Bogota. But now here he was, inked into a ledger tracking body swaps and identity fraud. No one dies twice, Clara muttered under her breath. She exited the vault with the ledger clutched tightly, her mind racing. She remembered the man in the chapel, the one in black, the wide-eyed shot, the burn scar curling from his neck. At the time, something about his posture had felt familiar. It hadn't clicked then, but now, with this name vibrating through her skull, she saw it. The way he stood, slightly weighted to the left, Nash had shattered his right ankle in training, walked with a subtle compensation ever since. Clara turned the corner into the records room and slammed the ledger on the desk. "Run facial recognition on chapel footage," she snapped to the tech on duty. "Focus on the man in black at the rear aisle. Pull any historical matches. You was there, at Paul's funeral." The tech whispered. He was watching the casket. Clara turned and walked briskly toward the exit. Nash had faked his death, joined the shadows, and now he was orchestrating this nightmare from inside a system he once vowed to protect. She reached for her radio. "Barrett, we have a name. Nash Carter. He's embedded in this. And Paul must have found out." Barrett's voice crackled back. "That explains the map. If Paul was meeting Nash at Blackridge, it wasn't for reconciliation. It was to confront him." The pieces fell like dominoes in Clara's mind. Paul had traced something rotten inside the department, something tied to Nash's disappearance and re-emergence under a different flag. He must have arranged a covert meeting at Blackridge to expose him, or record the truth, and Nash, knowing the consequences, killed the table, killed the witness, swapped the body, burned the paper trail, or worse. Clara loaded her sidearm, her voice low. "We're heading to Blackridge tonight. I want eyes in the sky, thermal scans, and ground units on standby. No lights, no noise. We go in silent," Barrett added. "And what about Rex?" Clara looked at the dog, who had been waiting patiently, still as stone. "He's the only one who saw both men. He's coming." The road to Blackridge twisted through the hills like a vein of rusted steel, overgrown with brush and forgotten by maps. But Clara drove it with a focus that bordered on obsession. Beside her, Rex sat silent, his breath fogging the window, his posture tense as if memory alone guided his senses. Behind them, Barrett and a tactical team followed in unmarked SUVs, headlights off, weapons loaded, radios set to low. According to the map found in the truck, the rendezvous point marked Blackridge 23 o'clock wasn't just a meeting, it was a trap, either one Paul had walked into, or one he had tried to set. Clara knew the place by name. An abandoned psychiatric hospital shut down a decade ago after multiple malpractice scandals. Now a rotting husk surrounded by chain-link fences and silent fields. The closer they got, the heavier the air became. "Their moms?" Clara asked into her comm. A soft voice crackled back. "Multiple Heath signatures. West Wing. Some movement, some stationary. Could be war machinery, could be bodies." "How many?" she pressed. "Too many for an abandoned site," came the reply. Clara didn't hesitate. "We breach in 5, west flank, entry through boiler level. Quiet sweep, no alerts unless confirmed hostile." As the SUVs stopped half a mile out, the team disembarked into the tree line. Night vision gear slid into place, rifles came up, and Rex led point, nose low, ears alert. The wind whispered through the overgrown grass, but Rex made no sound as he padded through the darkness. The facility loomed ahead, 5 stories of blackened brick and shattered windows, its silhouette broken like a skull cracked at the temple. Clara led them through a breach in the fence, then down a concrete slope to the old boiler entrance, rusted metal creaking under pressure but giving way. Inside, the air was stale and sour. "Movement ahead," Barrett whispered, gesturing left. Clara held up a fist, then motioned forward. Rex moved first, disappearing into the gloom. Then, from down the hall, a sound, muffled footsteps, slow, deliberate, unafraid. Clara raised her weapon and stepped into view. And there, standing beneath the flickering light of a hanging bulb, was Nash Carter. His coat was gone, replaced with tactical black, body armor strapped tight, side armor holstered like a badge. "I figured it was you," he said, smirking. "You always did finish what Paul started." Clara kept her weapon trained. "Where is he?" Nash tilted his head. "You're too late. Rex doesn't think so," Clara replied as the dog growled low at her side. Nash's smile faltered. That dog never knew when to quit. Barrett moved into position behind him, weapon raised. Hands hesitated, then raised his arms slowly. "You think you're fixing something, but you're just unraveling threads you don't." "Try me," Clara said. Nash's eyes darkened. "This wasn't my plan." I was working off orders. You think Paul found a trafficking ring? He found a pipeline, people, ideas, harvested data, full identity resets. He tried to expose it, and they tried to silence him. I only helped bury it because they had leverage. Clara stepped closer. Who gave the orders, Nash? Who told you to fake his death? Nash's lips curled into a bitter smile. Ask your father figure. Barrett blinked. What? Clara's stomach twisted. You mean Parker, Deputy Chief William Parker, Nash said calmly. The same man who trained Paul, who promoted you, who stood at that funeral with dry eyes and a folded flag. He built this, all of it. Silence crushed the corridor like a weight. Clara took one step back, her voice hollow. You're lying. Nash leaned forward, his voice low. Then ask yourself this. Who had access to the body switch? Who approved the funeral with no autopsy? Who ordered Paul into that last assignment off record without backup? Clara said nothing. Her grip on her sidearm didn't tremble, but her pulse did. Rex suddenly turned, ears sharp, nose twitching. He barked once, then took off down the right hallway, claws scratching against concrete. Follow him, Clara shouted, already moving. The team split, Barrett staying behind with Nash, while Clara and two officers chased after the dog. Rex turned corners with purpose, never hesitating. They passed locked rooms, rusted gurneys, shattered ivy stands, until finally he stopped outside a sealed door marked Isolation Ward C. He pawed once, then barked sharply. Clara stepped forward and kicked the lock. The door slammed open. Inside, the room was dim, lit only by a battery panel lantern in the corner. And on the floor, chained at the ankle, slumped against the wall, was Paul. His face was gaunt, beard grown in, one eye swollen, but it was him. Alive, breathing. He looked up slowly. Told you not to trust the coffin, he rasped. Clara dropped to her knees beside Paul, her gloved hands carefully brushing the bruised hair from his face as she scanned him for injuries. He squinted at the light, his breath ragged but stable, chained at the ankle like a criminal yet holding himself with the fragile dignity of a survivor. Barrett moved in behind her, radioing for medics, but Clara barely registered his voice over the pounding of her own heart. Can you stand? She asked urgently. Paul coughed, a dry, broken sound. I can try, he rasped. She nodded, producing a small bolt cutter from her tactical belt and snapping the chain with two heavy clacks. The steel links fell to the floor like a dead snake. She braced Paul's weight against her shoulder and slowly, painfully, they began moving back down the corridor toward the breach point. Behind them, Rex trotted ahead, ears pricked, tail stiff, scanning the shadows with military precision. The extraction team cleared each hallway meticulously, sweeping corners, checking doors, calling all clear. Clara didn't notice the slight change at first, the way Rex's gait shifted, the almost imperceptible stumble. But Paul did. His battered hand clenched at her sleeve. Something's wrong, he whispered. Before Clara could react, Rex yelped, a sharp, strangled sound, and collapsed mid-stride, his body seizing for half a second before falling limp onto the dusty floor. Clara froze. Rex, she cried, dropping Paul against the wall and running to the dog's side. His sides heaved shallowly. His tongue lolled unnaturally, and at the base of his neck, nearly invisible beneath the fur, was a tiny red puncture wound. Barrett cursed loudly. Dart, someone hit him with a tranquilizer. Panic surged through the team. Clara scanned the area, weapon drawn, heart hammering. But there were no footsteps, no shots fired. It had been said. This place wasn't just abandoned. It had been prepared. They had anticipated a rescue. They had anticipated Rex. Paul struggled to his feet beside her, clutching the wall for support. His voice was low, urgent. It's not over. Parker's not going to let me leave alive. The name ripped through Clara's mind like a bullet. She had almost convinced herself Nash was the apex of the betrayal. But no, this went deeper, higher. Deputy Chief William Parker, her mentor, her family friend, the man who taught her how to shoot, how to read lies, how to trust her instincts. And he had sold out Paul. He had sold out everything. Barrett's radio crackled again. Command, we have hostile chatter intercepted. A voice said, repeat, hostile chatter. Parker en route to extraction zone. Clara's blood turned to ice. He's coming here? Barrett nodded grimly. Sounds like he's bringing reinforcements. They didn't have time to think. Clara grabbed Rex's unconscious form, slinging his heavy body over her shoulders with a grunt. Paul limped after her, supported by Barrett on the other side. As they stumbled toward the loading bay exit, the hospital groaned around them, the wind howling through the broken rafters like a Banshee warning of coming slaughter. They pushed through a set of fire doors into the open courtyard, the cool night air slamming into their lungs. Carriers halfway to the perimeter fence when she heard the engines. Black SUVs, multiple, approaching fast from the North Access Road, headlights dark, moving in tight military convoy. Barrett hissed under his breath. They're boxing us in. Clara scanned the terrain, mind racing. No cover, no backup, and one of their strongest assets. Rex was down, vulnerable. She locked eyes with Paul. He nodded grim. Clara set Rex down gently behind a crumbled wall and drew her pistol. She checked the magazine full. Safety off, no turning back. Over the radio, another crackled command came through. Parker. Team Alpha, secure all subjects, use lethal force if necessary. Paul Henning cannot leave the site. If he does, we're all finished. The words echoed through the open courtyard, hollow and brutal. Barrett's face twisted in disbelief. He just said it out loud, he breathed. On open comms, Clara gritted her teeth, fury and heartbreak swirling into a cold, focused rage. Doesn't matter now, he knows we're alive. We need to survive first. Gunfire erupted from the far end of the yard. Clara ducked instinctively, dragging Paul down beside her. Barrett fired back in controlled bursts, forcing the approaching team to scatter. The SUVs screeched to a halt, doors flying open, armed men pouring out in tactical gear. Not police issue, but private contractors, the same kind who didn't leave paperwork behind. Parker's voice cut through the din again, not over the radio this time, but in person. He stood atop the far SUV, megaphone in hand, his silver hair shining under the floodlights they now switched on. You don't understand, Clara, Parker shouted. His voice was almost pleading, almost fatherly. If Paul talks, everything burns. Careers, families, lives. It's bigger than you, bigger than me, bigger than him. Paul pulled himself up behind the ruined wall, his voice hoarse but defiant. Then let it burn. Clara rose beside him, chambered around into her pistol and set her jaw. Behind them, Rex stirred slightly, his legs twitching in a dream, or a fight he wasn't conscious enough to win yet. The floodlights bathed the crumbling courtyard in a harsh white glare. Shadows sliced sharp and jagged across the fractured pavement like scars. Clara steadied her breathing, counting the silhouettes approaching from behind the SUVs, each one clad in black tactical gear, eyes obscured behind mirrored vises, weapons held with lethal familiarity. She leaned into the shattered concrete wall, gun at the ready, bodies chortling Rex's unconscious form as Paul struggled to stay upright beside her. Barrett crouched 10 feet away, reloading with expert hands, his voice tight over comms. 5 incoming from east, 2 flanking left. No insignias, definitely not local. Clara didn't respond. Her mind was spinning with Parker's words, the betrayal ringing louder than the gunfire. And yet, even in the chaos, something tugged at the edge of her focus. A fragment of memory, something Paul had said in the hospital room before the team found them. Rex always knows. He left them something. He didn't just follow the trail, he created one. Clara glanced at Rex again. His chest rose and fell faintly, his ears twitching ever so slightly. Then her gaze dropped to his left paw. Blood. Not his, still fresh, still sticky, smeared along the fur and the concrete where he had collapsed. She remembered the dart, the ambush, the sound he made before going down towards someone. She scanned the courtyard, her eyes locking on one of the attackers flanking left. His gait uneven, one arm tucked awkwardly against his chest, as if injured. Clara's instincts screamed. She stood, aimed, and fired one clean shot that struck the man in the thigh. He dropped, howling in pain, and as his visiphore clattered to the ground, she saw. You've got DNA, she whispered into her radio. Repeat. Rex made contact before going down. Bleeding suspect down at 9 o'clock. Barrett moved fast, zip-tying the suspect's wrists while another agent collected a blood sample from the dog's paw. Clara turned to Paul, who was watching with faint recognition in his bruised eyes. "He bit someone," she said softly. Paul smiled weakly. He always was one step ahead. Gunfire roared again from the far end of the courtyard. Clara ducked just in time as bullets shattered the wall behind her. Barrett returned fire, dropping another target behind a burnt-out ambulance. Clara pulled Paul back toward the loading bay doors, knowing they couldn't hold their position much longer. "We need to fall back," she shouted. "We've got what we need. Let's not die proving it." "Wait," he said, his eyes locked on a point above them, an old soot-stained wall that marked the hospital's central atrium. He pointed. "There, that wall. I left something." Clara looked up. The surface was smeared with what looked like graffiti, but closer inspection revealed something else, something chilling. Streaks of dried blood, deliberate, shaped into symbols. Not random, not violent. Structured. Clara climbed a nearby crate to get a better angle. When she shined her flashlight on it, she froze. It was a phrase, scrawled in bold, jagged strokes of blood. The letters distorted but unmistakable. "Trust the dog." Barrett climbed up beside her, staring. "What the hell?" Clara muttered. That was the last message. She turned to Paul. Your last GPS ping was near this wall, right?" Paul nodded. "I had no signal, no voice command. I needed to leave something behind. I figured if anyone came, they'd follow the dog." "A blood current message," Barrett said in disbelief. "How did you even—" Paul shrugged faintly. "You learn a few things when you're locked up with nothing but your mind and your fear." Clara looked again at the phrase. It was written in overlapping layers as if done quickly in intervals. Beneath the text were 3 lines, slanted hash marks that didn't match any code she knew, but Rex had found it. He'd barked here just before leading them to the isolation ward. He hadn't just been tracking scent. Clara turned to Barrett. "Photograph it every angle, then patch it through to digital forensics. That's not just a message, it's a key." Over the radio, one of the team shouted. "Parker's pulled back, they're retreating west." Clara's head snapped toward the tree line. "They're running?" Paul shook his head. "No, they're covering something up." In the distance, one of the SUVs exploded. Clara ducked instinctively as the fireball rose against the night sky. Barrett cursed. "They're wiping the site." Clara grabbed Rex's unconscious body and hoisted him again with the help of another officer. "You're not staying to burn with them." As the team retreated through the tree line toward the extraction vehicles, Clara glanced once more at the wall. "Trust the dog." The truth had been buried in silence, in codes, and death. Paul had known the only thing incorruptible was loyalty. And Rex, even drugged, even wounded, had left a trail of blood and teeth and instinct that exposed the one thing the whole conspiracy couldn't erase. The courtroom was packed wall to wall, humming with the anticipation of reckoning. The kind of anticipation that builds not from spectacle but from the hunger for truth long denied. Reporters leaned over velvet ropes, fingers twitching above recorders, cameras poised to capture the fall of titans. On the prosecution bench, the forensic analyst presented the blood report with the finality of a gavel. Rex, drugged and unconscious during the extraction, had clamped his jaws on the wrist of the man transporting the fake corpse days earlier, leaving behind saliva, epithelial cells, and enough blood to map an entire genetic trail. That one wound, inflicted in a moment of instinct and loyalty, unraveled everything. Clara watched from the front row, her face unreadable beneath the weight of justice being restored piece by piece. Paul sat beside her, hands thin, scars visible, suit hanging loose over a frame weakened by captivity but eyes sharp as razors. The judge leaned forward. "Based on the presented forensic, surveillance, and sworn testimony, this court accepts the conclusion that Officer Paul Henning was abducted under false pretenses, his death falsified, and his assets financial, reputational, and investigative." At the defense table, Nash Carter sat hollow-eyed, no longer smug, his hands clasped tightly in manacles that clicked every time he shifted. The prosecutors were not done. They called witness after witness, city accountants, who revealed that Paul's life insurance had been cashed posthumously by a shell company tied to former Deputy Chief William Parker, morgue attendants who admitted to falsified records under duress, a nurse who described the sedatives used to keep Paul immobile. Each name, each fact, was a blade drawn from the shadows. Parker, once beloved, once untouchable, had vanished following the raid, but his deeds were now laid bare in the light he had tried so desperately to avoid. The final piece came when Clara submitted the audio recordings found in the envelope. Paul's own voice detailing his suspicion, the names involved, and his precise fears. If you're hearing this, then they've already tried to erase me. But they hadn't. Because of Rex, because Clara, because truth, when fought for with blood and grit, has a way of surviving. The jury's verdict came swiftly, oftentimes just daintily define it. Sentences were handed down with weight, and Nash Carter was led away in silence. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had gathered not out of curiosity but solidarity. Officers in uniform stood shoulder to shoulder with civilians. News anchors gave live coverage while children's signs that read, "Welcome back, Paul, and trust the dog." Clara stood at the top of the courthouse steps, shielding her eyes from the mid-morning sun as Paul exited the doors behind her. Every step slow but firm, a man rebuilt from ashes. The crowd erupted in applause, a wave of sound that vibrated through concrete and marrow. But Paul didn't raise his hands. He didn't wave. Instead, he knelt slowly on one knee in the middle of the steps, and Rex Cattell, now recovered, alert, tail wagging, bounded forward from the crowd with a bark that cut through everything else like music. They met at the base of the steps, man and dog, soldier and guardian, and as Paul buried his face into Rex's fur, the noise of the crowd melted into something sacred. Clara turned her face slightly, blinking against the sting in her eyes. Paul whispered something into Rex's ear, and the dog let out a soft huff, as if responding. But even as Paul held him, even as thousands cheered, even as justice rang across the marble and concrete, Paul's eyes shifted. They drifted past the reporters, past the flags waving in triumph, and locked onto a figure at the far edge of the crowd, just beyond the barricades. The man wore a ball cap pulled low, a cheap tourist jacket, and dark glasses. He didn't clap, he didn't move, he just watched. Paul's breath caught slightly. Clara, noticing, followed his gaze. "Who is that?" she asked quietly. Paul didn't answer. The man turned and disappeared into the press of bodies before anyone else saw. Paul rose slowly, dusted off his trousers, and rested a hand on Rex's head. "It's not over," he said quietly. Clara nodded, her voice low and resolute. "Then we keep digging." Around them, the world moved on. If this story hit you right in the heart like it did us, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes loyalty is louder than lies. What moment shook you the most? Was it when Paul whispered, "Trust the dial"? Or when Rex took down the truth with nothing but instinct and teeth? And do you think that shadowy figure at the end was just a passerby? Or the next piece of the puzzle? Drop your theories in the comments. We're reading every single one. Say a quiet prayer for Rex, for warriors who never speak but always fight. And if you believe justice is only a just beginning, we'll see you in the next chapter.